In today's video, I'm going to tackle a tough question. Where is it better to be middle class? In the United States or in Europe? And there's three reasons I want to talk about this topic. First, I've been fortunate. I've been able to travel to over 50 countries and spend a fair amount of time in many of those countries. Second, I've been a fee-only financial advisor for over 20 years. So I look at data like this and I talk to families about middle-class challenges, middle-class issues. And the third one is, frankly, I grew up lower middle class myself. So for those three reasons, I wanted to have this discussion with you. So let's jump in. And the first one's going to surprise a lot of people. When you look at the expenses that middle-class families have, one of the expenses a lot of people would not mention, but tends to be one of their larger expenses, is taxes. So believe it or not, taxes are fairly low. And I know this is heresy, and I'm going to get slammed in the comments, so please be kind. But taxes in the United States compared to much of the world is pretty low. With this chart here, you can see the percent of total tax revenue as a percent of GDP. United States clocks in at 27%. You can see we've got France at 45%. We've got Germany at 40%. Italy at 43%. So overall, I think from a tax standpoint, the middle class is better served here in the United States. However, the question is, what do you get for the taxes that you're paying? And if you look at people in Europe, Europe tends to have, there's a lot of countries in Europe. Europe tends to have a wider safety net. If you're unemployed, they tend to have better unemployment benefits, better retraining, things like that. So that's a point in Europe's favor. Next is talking about the actual job itself and how hard it is to get a job and how hard it is to keep the job. In Europe, I think it's much harder to get a job than it is here in the United States. And the reason for that is much harder to get fired as well. So when you have a job in Europe, you have that job security. And I think that means a lot. It means a lot to many of us, having that job security. Many of us here in the United States are at-will employees. We could go into work tomorrow and our boss could say, you know what, your services are no longer needed, and they don't have to give you any reason for that. That does not happen in most parts of Germany. In fact, when I was in Germany, I met a young woman and we were talking about life in Germany versus life in the United States, and she worked for a technology company, a big technology company, I promise we've all heard of. And when I was there were a lot of layoffs taking place in technology. And I asked her, are you worried about losing your job? And she actually laughed. It was like, you ignorant American. And she said, no, I don't have to worry about losing my job because frankly, it's really, really hard as a German citizen to be fired from a job with a big company like that. So that's a major factor, I think, in favor of being middle class in Europe. Okay, the next one. One of the things that, having grown up in middle class, my family for many years shared one car. And so I've always been a big supporter of public transportation. I know that sounds silly, but it's true. And you know what? In Europe, just no doubt about it, public transportation overall is better in Europe than here in the US. But it's much easier to own two cars here in the United States, and gasoline is much less expensive. So what we lack in infrastructure for public transportation, we also gain with cars. I think personally, quality of life is higher when you have good quality public transportation. So that's a plus I'm going to put in Europe's column. Okay, let's keep talking about the work aspects of things, and let's talk about, what the job is like. And part of any job, we may love our jobs, but it's still great to take vacation. In the United States, we don't get much vacation here, right? Many of us start our jobs with 2 weeks of vacation. And in Europe, there's many countries that have laws and say employees need to have 4 weeks of vacation or 6 weeks of vacation. So in general, the Europeans have much more vacation than us. And you know what else? They take their vacation. I do want to mention this here in the United States. Almost half of us don't take all of our vacation. So if that's you, don't let that happen to you. Take all of your vacation. So I think from a vacation standpoint, I think quality of life in that case, that's a check mark for Europe. Next one, another thing that really affects our love of our job or our dislike of a job is really the relationship that we have in our boss. And I think many viewers are going to be shocked by this. In Sweden, they have a tradition that's called FICA. And the FICA is, I think it's about 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Everybody takes a 20 or 30-minute break. They share a hot drink together with maybe a biscuit or a light dessert type snack. And part of that is to build bonds with your coworkers, but you know what else? Part of that is to build bonds with your boss, your supervisor. And in many companies, it's the boss, it's the supervisor that brings in the hot coffee and tea for everybody and gives everybody the little snack. And they get to know each other on a personal basis. That's a really important part of their culture in Sweden. You do not disrupt FICA time. Okay, and so I think that's a plus for the EU. So the EU is Europe is starting to track up some points, but don't worry, we've got some really big ones. What's another really big one for the middle classes? How affordable is it to buy a house? What is that burden like? And obviously the burden's gone quite a bit higher in the last decade. It's become more difficult both here in the US, but also around the world. What this shows is how many years of 100% of your wage going to housing do you need to work in order to pay for your house? So let me give you an example. In France, they have to work a little over 12 years. In Poland, it's right at 12 years. In Switzerland, they have to work 11 years. Moldova is about 11 years. Austria is 11 years. Italy is 11 years. And then the United Kingdom is 10 years. And how does that compare to the United States? The United States is only 7.1 years. When I was a kid, when my father had a mortgage, he could work 3-4 years and pay for the house. So that number has increased quite a bit. So that's an increased burden on us. Okay, so housing is a big deal, and that's a major point for the United States. Okay, as I address the next one, what is the work environment like? My observation, having spent a fair amount of time in Europe, is they're much more formal in Europe. The way I am dressed now would be casual in Europe because I'm not wearing a tie. So do you like getting dressed up? Do you like being formal? Okay, the next one I want to look at is pay. Where's pay better? The next chart talks about the median income of many countries here. And you can see there are two Europe, maybe depending on your definition of Europe, European countries here, Luxembourg, Norway, and then the United States comes in at number 4, right at $65,000 a year. So there are countries in Europe that are ahead of us, most notably Norway. But look at some of these other ones. Switzerland's a little behind the United States. Austria is, quite a bit behind the United States. Germany at $54,000, that's $10,000. That's a big difference. So Netherlands, $54,000. So that's another mark for the United States, I guess, if we're tracking. So where is the middle class better treated? Where is it better for you to be middle class? That depends on all of us, and it depends on your situation. So, for some of us, I guess the way I summarize this is, are you a 20-ounce venti cup of coffee person that takes their coffee to go, right? Better, faster, cheaper. One of the factors that I use to define American culture. So are you that 20-ounce venti cup of coffee that frankly in much of the world laughs at us for doing that, right? Coffee is something to be sat down and shared with your friends, not something to take in a paper cup. So are you the 20-ounce venti cup, or are you the 4-ounce coffee sit down with your friend? Because I'm not going to answer that question for you, but these are some things for you to think about. I also want you to think about quality of retirement. And that's why I want you to think about watching this video up here, which talks about as you get ready for retirement, 7 things that I want you to stop doing as you approach your 50s and 60s in order to be better prepared for retirement and enjoy the journey to there. I'll see you in there. Bye-bye.